Welcome back, boils and ghouls. Remember, if you enjoy these videos, please hit that like button, think about sharing these videos with your friends, and get in the comments section below and let me know. If you really enjoy what you see, make sure you Hulk smash that subscribe button. But now, it is interview time. I do a lot of poring over innumerable interviews to get these little pieces of information that I need in a lot of cases for my videos. Rather than sift through a ton of stuff to answer these questions anymore, with the invention of the internet and especially social media, at your suggestion, I finally started reaching out to some of these people to ask them questions and even do interviews where I think applicable. Case in point, I'm working on an off the beaten rack episode about the web series turned comic Weapon Brown by the extremely talented Jason Yungbluth. Despite the popularity of the series Weapon Brown and the fact that he's been doing it for almost 20 years at this point, there's painfully few serious interviews that drive at the intelligence, skill, and perspicacity that drives Yungbluth and his work on Weapon Brown. Honing his parody skills to a razor's edge via his work with Mad Magazine, Yungbluth has created one of the most endearing and enduring parodies in recent memory. Equal parts Mad Max, A Boy and His Dog, Peanuts, and X-Men, Weapon Brown defies expectations, and through the skill of Yungbluth's storytelling and narrative, plus some mind-blowing art, after almost 2 decades, a rabid fanbase is still clamoring for more of what has been dubbed the weaponized universe. I sat down and read hundreds of pages of Weapon Brown material when I first came across it, and after picking up the omnibus edition trade paperback, I was struck by the meticulous attention to detail exemplified in every facet of the book, and I instantly knew I had to reach out and get some answers straight from the source. Thankfully, Mr. Yungbluth graciously took some time out of his busy schedule working on the latest and perhaps final installment of Weapon Brown, Aftershock, as well as his other comic book, Kobayashi Maru, to talk about the seeds, history, and the evolution of Weapon Brown, as well as his strip Clarissa, which I'm particularly infatuated with, and his work on Deep Fried as well. I hope you all dig this, and it's the first of many interviews that come for the channel, so kick back, relax, and enjoy this delicious dosage of trivial trauma and weaponized web strips in my inaugural interview with writer-artist Jason Yungbluth. So, you have done some really interesting stuff. I think I first came across your stuff in Mad, but the big reason that I wanted to have you on the channel tonight is to talk about Weapon Brown.
Cool.
Weapon Brown it kind of came out of nowhere for me.
Yeah.
I had somebody recommend Bart Kira and recommend Weapon Brown at the same time. I didn't get around to Bart Kira for a while because it just didn't really float my boat. I sat down in a single night and read every single piece of Weapon Brown material that you had up on the site. It blew me away.
All right. Thank you.
And the thing that kind of got to me was my channel is all based around the history and kind of the behind the scenes of what's happening with comics. And I didn't see anybody talking to you and like asking about all of these. You make some insane references in Weapon Brown.
Yeah.
Seriously. You dig so deep. And
yeah. It was probably my most research. I've probably never done more research on anything in my entire life. So I found my call.
And the little pieces that I found from you, you would talk about all this research. But the thing was, when I picked up the omnibus, I was reading the intro to that. And one of the things that caught me is that you said you actually weren't exceedingly obsessed with Peanuts.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you got into doing this? This book is 400 plus pages of Peanuts based references. How did you do that if you're not, and you did it so well. You really did. You dig so deep, you hit at the core of all the characters. If you're not obsessed with Peanuts, how did that come about?
Well, as I indicated in the that intro, I was a big Peanuts fan, but I was a fan of the cartoons, not so much the strip. When I was into comic strip, I mean, it's weird. I can't remember Peanuts ever being my favorite comic strip, or any particular strip being my favorite. I was a big fan of Garfield. When I started getting into comic strips, my favorite two strips were Funky Winkerbean and Garfield. And then another, I would love to give credit to this strip. It was a short-lived strip, made probably not in syndication very long. It had a very Funky Winkerbean feel, but it was not as popular. I can't remember the name of the strip, but it was one of the first comic strips I ever started trying to imitate. So so those would be my big three: Garfield, Funky Winkerbean, and unnamed Lost to History comic strip that ran in the Buffalo News. Maybe someday I'll search their archives and see. I could probably do that now. I could probably find archives of their comics page from that era. But Peanuts was never my number one. But I love the cartoons. I remain a huge fan of the cartoons of the animated specials. I like them even more because Charles Schultz actually wrote them. So it wasn't just he handed it off to someone else. They have his touch all over it. But the comic strip itself never really motivated me that much. It was only later when I started reading back that I realized just how funny it was. But for my childhood taste, I just didn't find it very funny. But yeah, so originally, I came up with this concept of Weapon Brown. Like when I was in high school, it was just a one-page cartoon I drew for myself. It was just Charlie Brown with a cyborg arm and a snarling Snoopy. I was very into Road Warrior at that point. And another famous influence was Harlan Ellison's story, A Boy and His Dog, which was really one of the more seminal influences on Weapon Brown, because it was about a post-apocalyptic scavenger and his pet dog. I used to listen to the audiobook version of that, read by Harlan Ellison. I used to go to sleep to that almost every night for a while.
Did you read the follow-up to?
I saw that to A Boy and His Dog.
Yeah.
I saw that there was a comic book years and years ago. I saw there was a comic book adaptation, which was interesting. I wasn't that interested in it. Some things you just like for their own, and then you don't really need more. So I was never like, I wonder what happens next to this character. It's like,
right.
And that sort of goes into what I'm doing with Weapon Brown now, because I'm doing the follow-up to Weapon Brown called Weapon Brown Aftershock. And it was very important to me that I didn't try to follow on from the original story. The original story, I thought, had a really good ending. It ended the story for me. And so the new one is a slight deviation, but it's also got plenty of good Chuck action. But I feel like a lot of stories, they just need to be ended where they end, and any follow-up material shouldn't try to continue the story. Sometimes stories need their beginning, their middle, and their end.
And that's very true. And with this amount of material, I mean, we're clocking in at over 400 pages at this point, and you're keeping going. Yeah, I think there is important to kind of have arcs that have recognizable beginning, middle, and ends.
Yeah.
But one of the main problems that I've come across, especially with web-based material, is that it's created on a weekly basis, like you did with Weapon Brown. So it's very difficult to gauge where is that beginning, where's that middle, and where's that end. And Weapon Brown, I just wanted to say, I think you really nailed it. And I'm super excited to see where you go with it.
Oh, thank you very much. So the original story, of course, was as many Peanuts references as I could squeeze in, and then some of the supplementary material are short stories that are based off of like famous Peanuts movies and holiday specials that I didn't fold into the main story. So that's sort of what I'm doing with Aftershock. It's it was whatever Peanuts material I felt I still had to drill down into, and the three stories are for this are Race for Your Life, Weapon Brown, based off of the Race for Your Life movie. One that is not specifically rizzing any particular Peanuts special, but it's done in a Mad Magazine style parody, almost like a Harvey Kurtzman style lampoon, and that one's called Weapon Brown. In the mode of Super Duper Man.
Nice.
And then the one that I'm about to start, which I'm really looking forward to, because each of these is being drawn in a slightly different style to give myself some new things to play with. And the third one is It's Your First Kiss, Weapon Brown. This will be the a send up of the It's Your First Kiss, Charlie Brown, where he actually meets and then kisses the little red-haired girl. So this will be my backstory to how Weapon Brown actually met Little Red, his love interest. And I'm drawing it as a I'm gonna do my best to imitate the Sin City style of artwork that Frank Miller made famous. So I'm looking forward to trying that out.
Popeye piece that you did, and you could kind of feel these like Frank Miller vibes bleeding off of some of those pieces. I mean, top Sin City Frank Miller vibes. I was really impressed with them. Yeah. So for me, that's pretty exciting to hear.
Yeah, I've done so. I like messing around with high contrast. I haven't really done anything sustained that was deliberately trying to ape that style. But for this, I was like, I've always wanted to try it. So this is the moment to see what I'm made of as far as stealing Frank Miller's crown.
Can you talk about the seeds of Weapon Brown? How it actually went from being that silly little pinup in high school where you were obsessed with Mad Max and Harlan Ellison, and how that became a backup story in Deep Fried, and if I remember correctly, and then became its own like web series from there.
Yeah. So the basically I was doing Deep Fried, which was my first self-published comic. It's an anthology of different types of humor, and I needed some filler material, and I had this idea for Weapon Brown. I don't know if I was calling it Weapon Brown then. The name itself I lifted from Weapon X, the Barry Windsor Smith graphic novel. Barry Windsor Smith was also a big influence on my art style. Anyway, so I had this note, just like, hey, why don't I tell this story? And it was going to be a story that just was the premise. I mean, explains itself. It's Charlie Brown and the Peanuts gang after the apocalypse, and they're all grown up, and Charlie Brown is all beefed out. And it was supposed to be as serious an interpretation of Peanuts lore told through the lens of the apocalypse that I could come up with. Like, make it as gritty and credible a story while still being fully aware that this is a ridiculous, reinterpretation of, Lucy as a mad scientist and the Great Pumpkin as this demon and all this stuff. And, I think we've all seen stuff like that our entire lives, like you said, Bart Kira is one that you've seen. Yeah. So yeah, everyone likes to do this kind of stuff, let's go crazy with someone's IP. But the story, I really like the story. I enjoyed coming up with it, seeing where it would lead. It was one of those stories that sort of writes itself as you go along, and which makes it fun for the storyteller. It's like, oh, I had no idea I was taking the story here, but here I am. And then that was put out in 4 installments in the first 4 issues of Deep Fried. And it was my most popular creation. And people were, at long last, people were like, I'd like to see more of this thing that you've created. So I was like, okay. I bundled it into a single one-shot edition, added some supplementary material, and that was the first solo Weapon Brown comic book.
That was A Peanut Scorned, right?
Well, A Peanut Scorned was A Peanut Scorned was the name of the main story that was collected from 4 parts in Deep Fried, and then there was a supplementary story called a Weapon Brown Christmas.
A Weapon Brown Christmas was the backup.
So the original Weapon Brown one-shot comic book that was the collection of all that material was just called Weapon Brown.
Oh yeah, because it's got that gorgeous black cover with the white designs all behind it. Yeah, okay. So you mentioned Barry Windsor Smith. And I looked a little bit more through the actual omnibus edition.
Yeah.
And I didn't come across a lot more comic book, actual, like, superhero cape and cowl stuff. Did you reference any other, like, obviously X-Men with, Wolverine, Weapon Brown, Weapon X. Right. But is there anything else that I missed in the comic?
As far as superhero stuff, probably not, because I some people read Weapon Brown and they don't quite get the premise. Sort of like, why don't you put the Thundercats in there or something like that?
It seemed like you were really sticking to lampooning strips to me.
Absolutely. It was specifically comic strips. To the best of my ability, American newspaper comic strips. I tried to limit myself almost exclusively to that. There were a few references to some web strips or indie alt weekly newspaper strips that I like Bob the Angry Flower makes an appearance. But to the best of my ability, I wanted to just limit to American newspaper strips, dating all the way back to the dawn of the era in the early 20th century. I mean, maybe it goes back further than that, and then right up to modern times. So I could put in just about every comic strip that has any popularity left to it at all, as well as paying homage to a bunch of the classic strips that deserve to be included in the pantheon of famous newspaper strips. And then there were sometimes I had to make a hard call because some newspaper strips and comic books interchange. So like there's been a Superman comic strip, there's been an Archie comic strip, and I tried to limit anything that had crossover from comic strips to comic books. I tried to limit the ones that I referenced just to ones that are better known as comic strips. So Archie was probably a tough call. I guess I decided not to use Archie. But that was both a comic strip and of course a comic book, and I was like, no, I'm going really for things that are most at home in the newspaper format. So no references to like 80s pop culture, right? Except through comic strips.
I thought it worked really well. I was just curious because I know I saw a couple of pinups and stuff. You referenced Frank Miller. Yeah. I noticed a couple. There was at least 1 or 2 pages where I was like, you did some extremely interesting experimentation with your art, and I could see a couple of pages where I was like, Mike Mignola.
Oh, yes, absolutely, yeah. I did one sequence that was a deliberate Hellboy homage. I did one and only, no, maybe it was 2 pages. At one point, I was trying to imitate the style of Cam Kennedy, comic book artist who I really like, and I started doing something where I was like using white pencil inside large areas of black to create a tone, and I did that for like 2 pages and then dropped it because I was like, no, this is not working out. But I kept the style. There's a lot of I'm not sure how many specific homages, except for maybe a couple page sequence where I really tried to do that Frank Miller style. But there's touches, references just in my style to Bill Sienkiewicz, John Byrne. I love John Byrne. The Omax series was a big influence on Weapon Brown. So you can, every artist that I've ever admired, there's going to be at least one point where I try to top them and fail. Every time. It's a complete failure. My lifelong goal is to draw like a robot or an android or something that looks as awesome as the covers to Barry Windsor Smith's Machine Man series. That was the first time I was exposed to Barry Windsor Smith. And he had this just fantastic detail. I was in love with it. I don't think I'll ever be able to replicate it, but I will die trying.
He's got a new Barry Windsor Smith's been working for the last 35 years on a graphic novel, by the way.
Oh, really?
And the name of it escapes me, but it is getting ready to come out in like a month or 2.
Oh, that's great. Is it anything to do with that large format comic series he was doing for a while back in the early 2000s, maybe? I don't know.
I don't think so. I think this is just...
and the Conan imitation and everything.
No, I think this is just something that he has been like a pet project that he's been throwing himself into for about 30 years. Yeah. Trying to do the whole Bernie Wrightson Frankenstein thing,
Okay.
Like, pinnacle of my magnum opus. I don't know how it'll work out, but
yeah, I'm working on that myself.
So getting back to Weapon Brown, you did the one-shot collection following Deep Fried. Yep. And obviously there was a lot of interest in that because you chose to continue on with the series. Yeah. Can you talk about the evolution from that one-shot into what would become all of the material that is in that omnibus? Yeah,
this is a blur for me because now thinking back, I was like, what the fuck was I thinking? I don't know, because at the end of the story, the Blockheads War story, at the end of it, thank God Kickstarter had arrived as a medium for publishing, because I don't know what I planned to do with this once it was done, but I just sort of decided that this was my most popular creation. It was interesting to me because I really wanted to do action comic stuff. And so I started creating Weapon Brown as a web strip that would update a couple times a week, and then I would collect each story arc into an individual issue, which was the Blockheads War series, of which I believe I had 7 issues. And then, and fortunately, it got some interest. There were some people on the comic strip mega thread on Something Awful, the Something Awful forums, and I suddenly started getting a lot of interest from people who were posting it on the Something Awful forum. So that was great. And yeah, and then the theme, of course, was like, well, I've pretty much used up all the Peanuts material. Let's just expand the universe, and it'll be, instead of Charlie Brown versus the Peanuts gang, it'll be Charlie Brown versus every other comic strip character. And then you got to have you got to have a conclusion. I'm like, well, the only thing that really makes sense is Charlie Brown versus Calvin and Hobbes. So it'll all be building towards that. And along the way, you get to meet everyone else, and some will be good and some will be bad. And there's just tons of idiosyncrasies to make fun of. And yeah, I was never at a loss for material.
Reading this series, you did some incredibly deep dives. How did you go about researching how you were actually going to include all these characters? Or actually, I guess I should say, how would you go researching even the characters to put into this? I had to look up a couple of those guys. It was impressive. How did you go?
I probably have to look them up now too, because I'm not. I would love to pretend that I'm this great human archivist of comic strip lore, but really my fascination was more or less limited to the comic strips that I grew up with. But the internet, of course, is the world's greatest tool, and there was no shortage of resource materials. I credited as many as I could remember in the acknowledgments page in the graphic novel. One for off the top of my head was called like the Crumbling Paper Index. It's someone's. I think it's like a subsection of someone's blog, and he finds and posts, ancient comic strips from that have long been forgotten, and that was a great resource. So basically the trick was, so I already knew as I wrote the story, several things materialized at once. It's like, okay, obviously I'll need specific segments for every one of the big strips that I want to reference. So Beetle Bailey, Garfield, Family Circus, Orphan Annie, Popeye, the big names will that everyone knows the idiosyncrasies from. The ideas presented themselves pretty easily. For instance, Beetle Bailey, what's under his helmet? You never see him without his helmet. So obviously everything leads to a gag about where his helmet comes off. Popeye, he eats spinach. Well, in my universe, he smokes spinach. Orphan Annie, how'd she lose her vision? She's not blind, but in my story, she is. That's why she has those big white eyes, and so on and so on. So it's like, okay, these are pretty obvious things that I'll be goofing on, because this is what I get from Mad Magazine. I remember from like the Kurtzman era. I think it was the Kurtzman era. They were always making fun of comic strips, and so I read a lot of collections that had their goofs on comic strips, Peanuts, and all the strips. And so that was really a big influence too, because I was familiar with the jokes about these comic strip characters from the parodies that already existed. And then there was another magazine too. I think it was Crazy Magazine. I didn't collect Crazy, but I had like one issue that was also very seminal in how Weapon Brown unfolded. It was a very odd multi-page segment in this one issue, and it was basically news coverage of a war taking place in the United States, basically a DNA war with Jello bombs and genetic bombs that were being, and it was like America was at war with Ohio. I think that was the gag. and it was just like, you would have like newspaper clippings, magazine articles, the TV guide from this world, and it was just like 10 pages long, and it was just so bizarre, and that really influenced my concept for the nature of the war that had taken place in the Weapon Brown universe as well. So it's interesting now just to say it, to imagine all the different threads that came together to form the germ of various segments of the story. And then the one thing that actually became complicating, because I didn't mean for Blockhead's War to go on as long as it did. I only imagined it would be maybe 3 issues. And what I forgot is that for every parody gag that I wanted to include for every important strip, there had to be several pages of story linking the, bridging, one gag to the next. So in order to get to my Family Circus gag, I was like, oh, that's going to take me 100 pages just to get there, because I got to write the story that will deliver us to that moment. So it became like, it became very sprawling. But back to your question about research, the most interesting part of the research I did was I decided that it was important to stick to my theme. So I wanted to make sure that no character in the story was not somehow a reference to a comic strip. I didn't just want to draw rando characters. A crowd scene had to have characters taken from comic strips. So I had to make sure that, I was looking this way and that way for every type of character. Like if I needed hobo characters, I started researching hobo strips or Depression era strips. There's a scene in this like mechanics workshop where it's like, oh geez, I'm going to need robots, all kinds of robots. So I had to find, the Robot Man comic strip and Bleeker the rechargeable dog, and then ancient strips from the 20s. Any strip I could find that had a robot in it that I could pull up. So that was that was where all those online resources came in handy too, because when your premise is that every detail needs to be specific, it was a good thing I didn't have to rely on like the one or two books about comic strips that I had at my disposal.
How did you go about navigating the perilous line of parody and copyright infringement? Because I know that's been a big problem for a lot of people who are less than intelligent and don't have quite a bit as much forethought as you did when you approached your project.
I was just contacted by a guy asking me about that very thing. So basically I just went to the Schultz estate. I grabbed any Schultz I could find. I shook and said, "Why don't you try and sue me, motherfucker?" I don't know if I can swear on this show, but feel free.
Oh yeah, go for it. Don't worry.
No, that's a completely legitimate question, and it's the question I get the most often. And I'm no lawyer, but I educated myself as best I could on what the fine line is between parody and trademark infringement. And there's a number of, the bottom line is you can be sued for anything. The question is does someone think they have a strong enough case to take you to court? And what you want to do is make sure that you never give them enough reason to want to do that, even if they don't have a case. Sometimes they make mischief. I was actually briefly harassed with like a DMCA strike by Peanuts Worldwide. They tried to, fortunately it was for a Kickstarter that had already concluded, but someone in their legal department had just come across it. And as you know, these property holders, they'll file a strike over anything just to mess with you. They don't even think about it. And what can you do? All you can do is basically counter it and then dare them to take you to court, which they usually won't do because it's just some robot in a cubicle who is just doing it as part of their work. But it was very annoying because, like, wow, what if they'd done this while my campaign was running? It was completely illegitimate. I went right back at them, and they dropped the claim. But it was annoying to think what would have happened if this wasn't a campaign that had already concluded. So I guess I got lucky there. But as far as the question of legality, everyone has to, if anyone wants to do this kind of stuff, they have to just familiarize themselves with the law. Use what other people have done as kind of a guide. So that was one of the things some of the things I had to do. The long and short of it is, you want to try to avoid, Mad Magazine, again, was also a very good instructor in this. You want to try to avoid using the trademark name specifically, as well as the trademark likeness. Now, there are exceptions to this as well, but the less your stuff directly resembles something that the trademark owner might have actually created for themselves, the more in the clear you are. The more your subject matter is an obvious lampoon of the source material, recognizable by any intelligent person, the farther you are away from anything that could be called an infringement, because parody is legal. And what I had to do was, and there were many times when I was working on Weapon Brown, it's like, is this really a parody? I mean, it's sort of, very dry and gritty and straightforward. But as I thought about it myself, it's like, well, who says a parody has to be a yuck fest? A parody is where you make fun. Making fun of something can come in many different forms. It doesn't have to be a joke about it. The joke is what you're doing with it, So the long and short of it is, I've been asked by everyone, and I've managed to keep my nose clean, for over, close to 20 years now since the first Weapon Brown material came out. So, at this point, I figure they probably aren't that interested in me. And I guess the same goes for all the other strips I use, but I only made fun of those other strips in precisely the same way I did Weapon Brown. The only other person, strip creator that I know has ever seen Weapon Brown is that someone told me that they had shown Weapon Brown and the Calvin and Hobbes material to Bill Watterson, who was like something like, didn't care. Didn't care one way or the other.
Totally anti-merchandise anyways.
Oh, yeah.
And he doesn't even care about all of the Calvin peeing stuff. He says that's his key to his immortality. Years after he dies, those will be around. So
he's a big influence on me too, for his willingness to maintain the integrity of his work. I've actually made it my mission to the best of my ability, put my art first and merchandising opportunities second. So,
do you have any merchandising ideas for Weapon Brown? I know you can get on Amazon and pick up the trade finally again.
Yeah,
but I've never seen like a shirt or a hat or anything like that.
There are T-shirts. I haven't put out a new Weapon Brown T-shirt in a while. I've manufactured some T-shirts. Some magnets, some various tchotchkes. But I'm thinking more of like, if Weapon Brown ever gets picked up by, a major publisher or something, they might want to, if they think it's popular enough, they may want to slap, be like Krusty the Clown, slap the name on everything. And that's something that I'm not terribly interested in. All I can imagine is, 800 tons of Weapon Brown plastic crap just sitting in a landfill someday, or a Weapon Brown doll stuck in a dolphin's blowhole. It's like, no, I don't want to be that. That would be like becoming what I created, the apocalyptic world of my own creation.
The aversion to Gary Larson syndrome.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Gary Larson. I love you. I swear to God. But
the good thing about never having made money is you start to lose your affection for it.
I don't know about that. I've been broke all my life. I still want plenty of that crap.
All right. Well, you can have the merchandising rights.
So
and the dolphin's death will be on your head.
Now, for anybody who doesn't know, after the issues came out, you talked a little bit about running your Kickstarter, and this is the book that you kickstarted. It was a collection of all of the Weapon Brown material. It also had a sketchbook, warts and all, I believe.
Yeah.
And a few other things with it.
Yeah, the book itself has some pinups, annotations, some new short stories, and
Can you talk about your experience with Kickstarter?
Yep.
I think as time moves forward, as comic fans, we're becoming more and more aware that I think the best material that's coming out, where there are no filters, there are no people who's going to be editorially messing with this stuff, is going to be from Kickstarter.
Yeah.
I've seen you had a lot of success with it, and I was just curious about, because you've been doing it for quite a few years, and I was curious about your experience in the beginning and how that's continued, because I know you've done it a few times.
Yeah, well, I had some friends who have run Kickstarter, so they gave me advice on how to tackle it. I did a lot of planning to make sure I knew exactly how to target people. Budgeting is extremely important. You don't want to raise you don't want to raise less than you need. I think it was the first one. I actually did have to go back to some of my pledgers and ask if they wouldn't throw me a little bit more money to cover shipping, which is a constant problem with people running Kickstarters, is underestimating the shipping. It's very tricky to calculate. But that was only the first time, and the fans were great. They came back at me. They were excited about the product, but that was a couple nights. I was like, oh my God, I need like $3,000 more. What am I going to do? In that voice too. That's my worried voice. But yeah, the experience has been pretty good. It can be exhausting though, because once you make the money, you're on the hook for all that shipping, all that packing, all the different vendors you got to deal with to get the promotional material. And I'm just one man. I don't have anyone else helping me. So all my Kickstarters have funded, fortunately. And I would like to move on from Kickstarter though. It's great for for the stuff that you don't have anyone else to handle, but it's a little tough to grow. A lot of people who do Kickstarters who are already famous do just great because they can raise. Some people raise $1 million or more for their web strip, which already has a huge following, and they can hire people to package it or use a fulfillment service. But I've never had that much reach, so I'm left just holding the bag for every ounce of the effort. And it's after you do a Kickstarter that you realize, wow, this is why people have publishers.
So you said you have plans moving on from Kickstarter. What are those plans?
Well, right now I'm working on the follow-up graphic novel to Weapon Brown, which is called Weapon Brown Aftershock, and right now I'm just shopping it to publishers. I'm talking to one right now. We'll see where that goes. Not ready to make any announcements, but I've got one publisher that I like that is interested in it, and if we can come to terms, they might be publishing the new graphic novel. If not, I'm hoping to find someone in 2021 when it'll be completed. I hope I can get it done before the end of the year. It's been a while. This was also raised. The Aftershock campaign that I did for Kickstarter was to reprint the original graphic novel, and then I promised I would release a new story as a digital graphic novel. And if I could get it published, I would, and I would send X amount of pledgers would get a copy of it. So I would very much like to get it into stores. It's possible if I can't find a publisher that I might just do another Kickstarter for the finished version because I would hate not to be able to stick it on the bookshelf right next to Weapon Brown. So is going to be shown to publishers. And I do like Kickstarter, and it's great for anything that you really want to get off the ground. But it's also quite a grind. And at this point, it's like I feel like I've done it 4 times now, and it would be nice to feel like I'm moving up the ladder a bit and get someone else interested in doing the packaging and not just leaving it up to me.
Speaking of packaging, the omnibus is absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
I want to point out to any of the listeners who are like, you're thinking about picking it up, you can get it for like $25 on Amazon right now. The annotations pages make that book stand out from basically anything that Marvel and DC puts out that's under $300. Did you?
Yeah. What's the big idea, Marvel and DC? Yeah, step up your game, see? Yeah.
Well, I mean, they're lazy. They really are. I wanted to point that out to people who are thinking about picking up the book. One of the things that really sets Weapon of Brown apart for me was not only can I tell that you were having fun with it, but from what I can tell, talking to you now, my suspicions were completely confirmed that you put that together yourself.
Yeah.
And the annotations pages was your idea. The introduction is you. I learned more in that introduction than I usually learn in all of the promotional interviews and the 30 pages of like Neil Gaiman writing about somebody he's met 4 times for DC in the latest, whatever trade paperback. It was really cool to me. How involved were you with the layout of the omnibus? And can you talk a little bit about putting it together and your ideas for including that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Every part of it was me, with the exception of the what small amount of design work was required on the part of the people assembling the book at the printer end, which is just to say the binding process itself. So that's not even quite fair. No, every scrap of it was entirely from my head. I didn't have any help on it. But I did have the benefit of studying other books, other concepts for how to make a book jazzy, the decisions had to make that I had to make, like should I have a dust jacket or should I just do a full color hard case? I eventually decided to go with the dust jacket, and then the hard case itself has a nice gold foil embossing that I think turned out pretty well. And then different aspects of the layout, like how to do the chapter breaks. That again was something that I borrowed from that issue of Crazy Magazine. I love I love stories that give you like little world building snippets, so you can sort of see how things got where they got. So my favorite part of the graphic novel and assembling it was that for each chapter break, I would have a newspaper, and this was also, you know, in keeping with the theme of newspaper strips. So these were newspaper headlines about newspaper characters, and it was like the slow unfolding of the war. So we begin with a famous, well, famous then, not too famous right now. I guess the character is named Casper Milquetoast. Excuse me, I can't remember what comic strip he was in. It's probably a strip of the same name. But we get that term milk toast from this, like a wimp. We get it from this newspaper character. So it begins with the newspaper of Casper Milquetoast has just lost the presidential election, and then we don't know who it is who's won, and then slowly through the story we finally realize who actually won the election, and it was another famous newspaper character. But for every chapter break, I would show that this new president was like ratcheting up tensions, and that we were going to enter into a war with Mongo, the empire from Flash Gordon. And then other famous nations get involved. Elbonia from Dilbert, and Slumberland was my interpretation of Little Nemo, and so on and so on, until finally the last chapter we get is the president himself, like fleeing the White House in a hail of gunfire, which ties a bow on a revelation that's already been revealed earlier in the story. So that element of design was something I really enjoyed doing. Just all the gags. I got to include a lot of references that hadn't found its way into any other part of the story, were contained in these newspaper columns. But that was all for me, and all for me studying different products and seeing, you know, what would fit well with what I was trying to create.
How long did you spend laying that out?
Oh gosh, I don't know. The whole process from beginning Blockhead's War to the finished product, I think, was about 5 years. But how long every individual portion took, I couldn't even begin to say. I mean, not overly long. It just took the time it took, is all I can say, really.
I was just curious. Sometimes the transition from like posting those pages online to getting them to how you want them to look in a book, I know can be excruciating for some people. Yeah,
it was. Well, I guess I'll just chalk it up to one of those labor of love things. When you enjoy what you're working on, the time doesn't necessarily fly, but you don't mind the effort, you know. So it wasn't like pulling teeth. And I knew and the important thing to me was I knew that I wanted this to look great, and I'm only one person, so I knew that I would have to be very patient, because I would need to really mind my P's and Q's and not rush through any stage of it, or else I knew I would be kicking myself later if I found one typo, and there probably are. But you know, this I was like, you know, reading and rereading every little thing I did, and like making sure everything was as perfect, letter perfect as I could make it, because I knew it. You know, there's going to be no one to catch my mistakes. The time that it took was time that was well spent. So that's why it didn't feel like it took as long as it might have taken someone else.
I really did want to commend you on it, because I think you did an incredible job working as like an entire company. Mm-hmm. Most people don't get a book that reads that good out. Right. So it was time well spent.
Well, thank you. And really that compliment is what I did it for. If someone can read this and they say, wow, this looks professional from beginning to end, it's like, that's all I want. It's all I want to be as a professional.
Well, not only that, but you keep referencing, you know, this issue where you loved the world building, and you could get so much out of these like weird little newspaper headings and this kind of stuff. The annotations and the other things that you added that you were talking about created an entire weaponized universe for me.
Thanks.
So you very well accomplished your goal.
Thank
you. You talked about how long it took for this to kind of come to fruition, and that it took quite a bit longer than you actually thought it was going to. Was there ever a point where you just wanted to toss in the towel?
No, because it was keeping me busy, and it was a story I wanted to tell. So it was more like exasperation at myself for not realizing how long this was going to take. But like I said, at the end of it too, is like there wasn't Kickstarter when I began, so at the end of it, it's like, wow, thank God there is Kickstarter, because again, what was going to happen with this? I would otherwise have had to have found a publisher, and some of them were a little hinky about it. When I showed some preliminary work, some of them were worried about the copyright issue. So I was like, okay, I'm not. It's already tough enough to get a book published. Even harder if there's it's front loaded with a potential legal problem. So, but I just stuck with it. I was like, what'll happen is what's going to happen. It's getting me more readers than anything else that I'm working on, and I'll just see it through. I enjoy the key, as far as I'm concerned, is when you're a writer, if you've got a story that's worth telling and you really enjoy the story, then that's the reason to do it at all. So yeah, there was never any reservations about where I was going. It was more like, wow, I can't believe I didn't realize how long this was going to take. But that's become something of a repeating theme in my life, is not realizing that everything I plan to do is going to take at least twice as long as I think it is.
At least I'm not the only one that has that problem. So let's talk a little about the newest series.
Sure.
The coolest thing for me from what I've seen is the art. You talked about experimenting quite heavily throughout the original run of Weapon Brown. Can you talk about the art for this new series? Because it's absolutely jaw-dropping.
Thank you very much. So this one, I'm using spot color. The original Weapon Brown is black and white, and when I conceptualized Aftershock, I thought, okay, well, I'm keeping with my my love affair with Frank Miller. He did some of his Sin City books with a single spot color. I was like, okay, I'm going to try that. And actually, the inspiration for Aftershock was actually me drawing inspiration from myself. I did an animated trailer for the original graphic novel. That was my Kickstarter trailer. And I was pretty pleased with the way it turned out. And I ended up using spots of red and yellow, along with that sort of high contrast Frank Miller type stuff. And I thought, hey, wouldn't it be neat to do my next story using that same philosophy? I'll just use spots of yellow for Weapon Brown's shirt. I'll use red where appropriate, and it'll be a stylistic choice, but it's still mostly black and white. So there was that, and there was also one of the stories that I did for the graphic novel, which was a bonus story called It's the Easter Mongrel Weapon Brown, which was my parody of the Easter special. I did some interesting stuff with halftone that I thought turned out really well, and so I wanted to do a style that was more like that. It was sort of like the conclusion of my Weapon Brown journey from, because I'd experimented with all these styles along the way, and here I was going to be like, okay, I think I've landed here. This is going to be the Weapon Brown style. But then the new graphic novel has that, but then it's also told in the format of people telling campfire stories about Weapon Brown. And each of these campfire stories is itself drawn in a slightly different style. So that's the going theme of this one, is that whichever story someone is telling, the art is exaggerated to meet their concept of who Weapon Brown was, because they're telling like tall tales, Paul Bunyan type tales of Weapon Brown. So and then the final one will be the one that hopefully the fans have been looking forward to the most. It'll be the one that's more of a straight Weapon Brown story with Chuck as we know him, but done in a more stylized drawing style that will add a little sparkle to the project.
So is this going to be an edit, or do you have further plans for Weapon Brown? I mean, it's been almost 20 years, right?
I know, kill me. So here's the thing. I originally didn't intend to do Aftershock at all. I had the idea almost immediately, but for reasons that I mentioned before, that a story should end when it ends, I didn't want to go back. But of course, it's tough to say no to something that people will buy. So when you're scrapping a living like I am, and your favorite project is everyone else's least favorite thing that you do. That's deep fried, by the way. The stoner comedy stuff that I've been doing for forever. It's like it takes me the most time and no one reads it, but I love it. So when you're doing that, you have to find a way to make the ends meet, and I think the least you can do is capitalize on something you've created that people do like. So I wasn't going to do a follow-up, but then I wanted to reprint the graphic novel because I suddenly got a glut of sales. The internet is fantastic. One guy pushed Weapon Brown on his video channel, and suddenly I was getting orders that beyond anything I'd had for years. So, excuse me, I got a sneeze coming out. It's abandoning ship. Dang. Anyway, so there it was. I was suddenly getting popular. I was running out of inventory. I needed to reprint the book, so I did another Kickstarter, and I said, okay, tell you what, you support this Kickstarter, I'll give you some more Weapon Brown. And I had this Aftershock idea. So I think I'm losing track. What was the question again?
I was just wondering if there were any plans
any
following
further,
this, because I know the Aftershock kind of was like, hey, I got a Kickstarter, so here's something to give you guys who've already paid for this stuff.
Yeah. And Aftershock 2, it was originally supposed to be like 48 pages. It'll probably be closer to 90 when it's done. But as far as, okay, so the only thing left, if anyone who is spoiler alert for anyone who's going to read Weapon Brown, in the final sequence, we see Weapon Brown has acquired a new companion, and they're driving off into the sunset to take bloody revenge on those that are left to take revenge against. And that is perfectly fine to end the story there. But I've always had this notion that I could maybe do one more short story set decades later that will tie a bow on everything that has come before it. And I would only ever do that as maybe part of an overwhelming omnibus that collected both the original graphic novel and Aftershock. If I were to be famous enough or well-liked enough but I've already got in my head, I would probably call it the Book of Chuck. Just one gigantic book with sort of a really interesting cover with some texture. I've already got it in my head. And then the supplement to that would be one final what happened afterwards story. That would be, this would be years from now that I would even consider it, and it would be plenty of time for people who have absorbed the story, so it wouldn't feel like a cheap sequel. It would just be one short story, finish everything off, and that would probably be the only additional Weapon Brown material I have any interest in besides finishing Aftershock.
So what are your plans following Weapon Brown? I know you're finishing up on Aftershock. That'll be done in the next year or two or whatever, and out and published.
Most of it should be done before the end of the year. So, oh my God, if it was another 2 years, I'd have to kill myself.
Well, but you're talking about publishing next year, right?
Oh, yeah. With luck, it'll be on shelves sometime next year.
So that'll all be wrapped up, end of 2021, say. What are your plans? I know you said that I guess people aren't super receptive to Deep Fried, which kind of bums me out because I love that series.
I make it for you, baby. I make it for you and 3 people that comment on it.
Really? Do you not get more people talk to you about Deep Fried?
Well, you know what? I don't know how many Deep Fried fans there are. It's never been a big seller for me. Weapon Brown has almost exclusively been the crutch that my career has leaned on as far as popularity. But I have fans for everything I do. Clarissa would probably be the second most popular thing that I do.
I was going to ask about Clarissa.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to Clarissa in a second. So with Deep Fried, I'm wrapping that up too, and I'm right in the middle of a story that I came up with 10 years ago. I've always wanted to do a Lord of the Rings style parody with the Deep Fried characters in it. So I'm right in the middle of that story, and it's part of a longer arc which might have 1, possibly 2 more issues after this one, and then I'll be done with Deep Fried. I'm just gonna, I didn't even realize I had a story to tell with these characters, and then one day I thought, I'd really like to wrap this up. I've been drawing the Deep Fried characters since I was 12. Wow. The Roadkill the cat originally began as a Garfield knockoff that I drew when I was, starting to imitate cartoons. I stuck with that character through high school. I added Beepo the clown in college, and then that they became the crux of the Deep Fried comic book, which I published in 2000. and it was just supposed to be, sort of like my contribution to comics like Milk and Cheese, and lowest comic denominator, Kieran Dwyer's outrageously offensive comic, which knocked me on my ass. So I always wanted to do comics that are in that league. But eventually it's like, okay, I've got other ideas and I need to wrap this up. But I wanted to wrap it up in such a way that I actually gave the characters a story to fulfill. They never really had an overarching story that they were involved in. They were just rando stories. So I came up with this story called The Hero's Journey that involves all three characters, introduces some new elements to them, puts them in a long story. And then so when that wraps up, that's going to be basically it for Deep Fried itself. And I'm hoping that will be concluded next year as well. I mean, I can't imagine it going farther than that. So that should be complete in 2021. Who knows? Maybe I can publish that as well. I do it as print-on-demand comics and web strips, but I don't know what the future publishing possibilities are for Deep Fried. I'd like to think it has some potential. But then the next major project I'm certain that I'll be working on is Kobayashi Maru. I don't know if you've been exposed to that on my website or not. This was the original project that I began after Weapon Brown, and then sort of got sidetracked by doing more Weapon Brown. But I've already published the first issue of it. And I really want to. That's one of the things where I really want to find a publisher for it, and pitch them the first issue, see what they think, and hopefully it gets picked up as a series. But this is a sci-fi. It's not quite. It's slightly humorous, but also action adventure, sort of like Weapon Brown. It sort of threads the needle between being ridiculous and being sincere. But it's I sort of followed up on the theme that I began with Weapon Brown, where Weapon Brown was goofing on comic strips. I wanted to do something about Star Trek. And, that wasn't just a fanfic, right? Because, I can't publish a fanfic. I can't use the Star Trek material. So I got an idea, well, what would Star Trek look like, the world of Star Trek? What would it look like from the point of view of people who are not on board with the Federation's agenda for the universe? And I got thinking about, maybe how about a story told from the point of view of people who live in the neutral zone, right? And then it's like, well, I can't use Star Trek qua Star Trek, right? But what I could do is I could reinvent it so that this is the world of Star Trek, literally seen through the eyes of different kind of rough and tumble people in that universe. And I'll get around using names like the Federation or the Klingons or whatever by having everyone talk in this slang. So it's basically like, if you know what Star Trek is, you'll get all the references. But if you don't, it's sort of its own standalone sci-fi universe. And we'll see how well that goes over.
Yeah, I've read a little bit of it on this site, but I have to admit, I am terrible at keeping up with stuff online.
I'm terrible at keeping up with it too. So, but next year, I hope I will be publishing it on a weekly basis in earnest. And with any luck, I'll have gotten a publisher to take an interest in it as well. So keep coming back.
Okay, so last Weapon Brown question, really. We're 20 years down the line. You talked about how Deep Fried is kind of your series. It's the one that you do for you. And fans are definitely much more interested in weaponized universe and all of that. What's your relationship with Weapon Brown at this point? I just did a huge piece on Sam Keith, and the guy is mentally in anguish every moment of his life that people like Sandman and The Mask. I think he really wants to track people down and just like pound Zero Girl into their skull. I was curious, what is your relation? Because you seem to have a really healthy relationship with Weapon Brown, allowing it to let you do other things as opposed to letting it control you.
Yeah, I like with all the things I write. This is going to sound a little pretentious, and I have never formulated it this way, but I'll say it now. I kind of like have relationships with the characters where I show them respect and they show me respect, if you want to think of it that way. Meaning that when I wrote Weapon Brown, so I've said several times now the importance of not continuing a story that's already ended. So as I've conceived new Weapon Brown material, it has to be its own story, and distinct from the original story, so that I'm not trying to just dig up old material. So I like to think of my characters as having a life of their own that has to be respected, and that gives me self-respect in the stories that I create for them. So with Weapon Brown, like I said, when I created Aftershock, it's like, okay, I really didn't want to do any kind of sequel, and so it's like, okay, well, I'll solve that by making it not a sequel. It will be more Weapon Brown material. It will be a kind of an anthology type situation. It will tell some stories that I would have told in the original graphic novel if I could have, but it will not step on the toes of my original story, which I was very satisfied with the conclusion. So and it's a small enough dose of material that I don't feel like I'm. This is going to sound weird to say. I feel like I'm not exploiting my own work. I don't know how a guy who makes as little money as I can have so much fear of putting out too much of a good thing. But I just it sort of goes to my sense of what good storytelling is. So this new stuff. So you say, what's my relationship with Weapon Brown? It's if I didn't feel like I was doing something new and interesting for me, I'd probably feel like it was pulling teeth doing it right now. But because I like the story I'm creating, and because I think it deviates enough from what I did in the beginning, especially with my own fun experimentations in the artwork, and my own enjoyment of introducing, like, here's some cameos by people you remember from the old stories that, no one was dying to see them again, but it's kind of nice to see them pop up. One of them has just been revealed, and I think that's. I'm hoping that was fun for the audience. I won't give it away here. You can go to my website and read it. But so I feel like I'm not just like. It's not like a Better Call Saul. I like the show Better Call Saul. Don't get me wrong. It's great. It does seem a little unnecessary to explain everything about Breaking Bad through the lens of Better Call Saul. Here's how this happened, here's how that's happened, and oh, look, those characters that you remember, they're back. It's like, okay, it's fun, but it's not necessary. I prefer Breaking Bad to stand on its own, so I'm not trying to do that with Weapon Brown. I'm not trying to say, oh, and now this is the backstory for how he got his shoes, and here's how he got his laser gun, and all that stuff. It's like not necessary. And I feel the same way about all my other characters too. When I'm doing Deep Fried, I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna do Deep Fried right. I'd always wanted it to be the filthiest comic you could ever read that was still funny. And I decided with the hero's journey, it's like, okay, I'm gonna see how far I can push the limits and yet still have it be funny. Because anyone can be shocking, but it's tough to be shocking and funny. And the best stuff I've ever loved has been that in equal measure. Mind-blowingly shocking, but incredibly funny. So that's what's fun about doing, Deep Fried. And it's also fun to sort of have a goal in mind this time. Because I never wanted to... There's been plenty of times where I should have just dropped Deep Fried, and a couple times where I did. But I just keep coming back to the characters because they allow me to tell jokes that I can't tell in other formats. So at least I feel like I'm telling a story that's interesting to read. Whether or not anyone else is going to find it interesting years from now is another question. But I like the story, so I like giving them their due. And I've got a soft spot in my heart for the characters. I've just had them for so long; it's tough to let them go. But I also don't want to be hitting my head against a brick wall with a particular product that is fun for me, but that just takes up too much time to do, right? So, and then Clarissa, too. Clarissa is a character who I've created various stories, and it's only recently that I've, with the last story that I wrote, that I sort of got the formation of what should really be the final arc of her character. And a lot of people want to know what's going to happen with Clarissa. I've been drawing her since 2000 as well. And, I've done a bunch of one-off stories now and then, but it's always been in my head. It's like, yes, I can't do Clarissa dirty here. She definitely has to have a conclusion to her story, a story that was never supposed to be told. She was only ever supposed to be a one-off, one-page strip, sort of like Weapon Brown. And then my characters are always taking over my life. So yeah, I've got ideas in my head for what to do with Clarissa. Maybe 2022, assuming there's still enough interest in Clarissa, which there probably will be, she, sort of people will suddenly discover her every 6 months or so in a Reddit thread or something. So in 2022, I bet that if Clarissa is still a going concern, I will proudly sink myself into finishing her story as well, and then get that wrapped up.
So for anybody who doesn't know about Clarissa, because I was going to ask you about her just a little bit, can you describe what Clarissa is and how that got started?
Sure. So Clarissa was, again, a one-page strip in the first issue of Deep Fried. Like I said, Deep Fried was an anthology, so all the characters we've been talking about had their premiere in Deep Fried. And Clarissa, so basically that was my effort to do the thing I just described, the world's most shocking yet funny comic strip. And it got the reaction that I wanted. It's one of those rare gems where it's like, holy shit, this worked way better than I thought it would. And I won't give away the gag of the first strip, but suffice to say, Clarissa is an abused child. And the original one-page strip, which was inspired by a made-for-TV movie about a father who was abusing his daughter, and then had like the most let's put it this way, the ending to that TV movie, which I think was called There's Something About Amelia, or The Problem with Amelia, something like that. Look it up on IMDb. It had Ted Danson, I think, was the lead, the father. So it had what we could just call today the least Me Too ending I have ever seen in a movie that tackled this subject. And the when I saw it, my response was, well, their Thanksgiving is probably going to be pretty awkward. And this led to my comic strip, Clarissa Ruins Thanksgiving. So that got a huge reception. And then sometime later, I guess for the second issue of Deep Fried, I was like, I came up with two stories, actually. One which I don't think is that great, but which some people seem to like. It was that one was called Bath Time Fun with Clarissa. And that was Clarissa breaking the fourth wall. I've never done a strip like that since, but that was Clarissa talking to the audience. And then there was another strip, I think in the same comic. This was probably issue 3 of Deep Fried, and this one was called Stuffed Friend. And Stuffed Friend set the tone for everything I've done with Clarissa since. It was more poignant, less brutal. Actually, I shouldn't say that. It was brutal, but it was not. It didn't like punch you in the face with the brutality. It made you. It's very bleak, but in a captivating way. I just have to assume that's how people feel. And once I did that one, and the response to that was almost as strong as the response I got to the first strip, even though the tones were very different. And I was like, okay, this was never meant to go anywhere, but I could start telling a long story with Clarissa. And this led to, I think the next one immediately following it was called Family Portrait, which again, good response. People seem to be grooving on where I was taking it. But each of these stories was self-contained, and I also began to realize, like, okay, each of these stories ends with kind of a gut punch about Clarissa's home life, and I can't just keep doing that, because not only will it wear out the shock value, but also I don't want this to be endless shock value. I want the character to grow and have a story. And, of course, the story ultimately has to be what will become of Clarissa. She's living in this nightmare home life. Everyone wants me to do a comic strip where she takes a gun and shoots her father. That's not going to happen. I can tell you that much. That is not going to happen. But people want resolution to this. And it's like, okay, I've had some ideas, very nebulous ideas about how to wrap it up. I do not know at this point what is going to happen between Clarissa and her father. That has not even crept into my imagination a satisfying resolution for that. I've got what probably will take place afterwards, but I don't know exactly what's going to happen. So it's definitely going to take me till 2022 to figure out exactly what's in store for Clarissa. But there will be some conclusion at the earliest possible date.
And when you get that done, are you going to be collecting that kind of like you did with the Weapon Brown stuff?
Yes. Okay. So I've had an idea for a while about a collection of Clarissa material, and it's also kind of tricky because each strip is slightly different, and how to unite them into I'd like it to be a graphic novel that tells her complete story, but each strip it was never laid out that way. So I've been trying to think about how I could knit them all together. And I've had the bones of an idea for a while. It's starting to crystallize as of last year when I wrote the most recent Clarissa story, which was something I'd long wanted to do. It's interesting the way these stories can take on a life of their own. I did one story called Family Portrait that introduced Clarissa's brothers, and father, mother, and two brothers. And I created this foundation of what the brothers are like in response to what the father has been doing. And I always got the impression that I'd left people with the idea that the older brother is a real asshole. And it's like, no, he's not an asshole because he's a victim too. They're all victims of this guy. Yeah, they're all damaged in their own way. So the most recent story I did addressed that directly, and then I hope gave readers the understanding that everyone's in trouble in this family. And I liked the conclusion. I liked it that I finally figured out how to soften the image of the brother. And then there's the other brother to deal with. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen with him. But either way, the structure of what the finale would be started to coalesce in my head, started to knit together with some of the other ideas I've had. It's all still very vague, but I can see a path forward for Clarissa.
Interesting. I know a lot of people, when they first come across it, are very inclined to think of it as simply shock material.
Yeah.
And if anybody who's watching this does go out and check it out, kind of do prepare yourself. It is a little bit brutal.
Yeah.
But
a lot of people recommend trigger warnings for Clarissa.
Yeah, well, everybody recommends trigger warnings for everything. Would you like a peanut butter sandwich? Not jelly.
Well, this one is probably the strip that the whole concept was created for, because it does. Okay, so if anyone hasn't figured it out yet, Clarissa is the victim of sexual abuse, and a lot of people have contacted me who've been the victims of sexual abuse, or know people who have, and said that they understand what Clarissa's about. There have been some weirdos who have not, but mostly people have understood Clarissa. But it's not for the faint of heart, So anyone who has suffered from that situation would be better forewarned what they're in for if they go looking for Clarissa.
Well, yeah, but I think it's very important to point out that while it is fairly serious and dark and bleak, as you put it, it's not callous, and it does not poke fun at the situation for me, which is very important. I actually really liked reading Clarissa, which kind of took me, I'll admit, it took me a little bit off guard when I first got to Clarissa, and I was like, whoa. Few stories in, though, I really did. I got invested in Clarissa. I was very interested to see what you would say as far as the publication going forward. And so you said you've actually had people who are victims of sexual abuse reach out and talk to you about the series?
Yeah, I've had people post comments on my website or send me emails and say that they appreciate that there's a story like this that I guess, everyone has a slightly different take, but mostly they understand Clarissa. They see themselves in Clarissa. Clarissa is, as a character, she's kind of a curious character in that I'm not always sure what's going on inside her head. She knows what no one else in that world knows. She's the only how do I describe this? She's the only one who's living in the real world in that universe that I've set her in. Which makes her. I write her almost like an adult, but she's not an adult. But she'll say adult things in a way that's just meant to really soften the blow of the subject matter. Because if it was really about a child with a child's mind, first of all, you could not get any kind of humor out of that. But also, her dialogue would just be too depressing. It's a depressing strip already, but it's a depressing strip that sort of tries to it does what a lot of strips about little children do, which is put adult dialogue in the mouth of people who are not old enough to speak that way. But the justification is she's been fast forwarded to adulthood, adult reality, her circumstances, and so it sort of makes sense that she should be like this. I guess I would compare her dialogue a bit to like Daria, from that cartoon. I never liked the Daria cartoon, but she's sort of like, bleak and mumbly and sardonic. But it's, I guess my original concept for how to approach her was that she's one of these gloomy kids that you've seen in gloomy, spooky cartoons, but unlike them, she has a reason to be. And so that sort of, it's sort of a sweet and sour attitude that she has is makes more sense than someone who is just talking adult for the sake of talking adult.
So you said that basically the entire reason for Clarissa was that made-for-TV movie?
There was that. Okay, so there was that, and then I had also just recently, at the time of creating Clarissa, I'd also just recently seen the documentary about Robert Crumb. And Robert Crumb was another guy who was like, I liked his artwork. I was never too much into his humor. I think I was just a generation too late to really appreciate his writing in the context in which it debuted. But I saw this wonderful documentary on him by Terry something. Anyway, it's easy to find. It's called Crumb. I loved it. And it talked about his weird family, and it also talked about some of his more outrageous comic strips that raised some eyebrows. And one of them was a comic called Joe Blow. And I'll just leave it at that. Look that one up if you want. But it was like, and it was like, wow, that's really shocking. I'd like to do a comic strip as shocking as that, and enter the pantheon of people creating shock. But it was the fact that I'd seen that movie that was like, oh, okay, you want shocking? This is all coming together now. It's one of those things. The stars are aligning, and so that was where it was equal parts. The subject matter was that movie, and then the impetus to do something like that was being inspired by the work of Robert Crumb.
And not to like blow up your spot here, but for anybody who's watching that is curious, Joe Blow is about a disturbingly incestuous family. Yeah. And it is treated with the utmost like Leave It to Beaver 1950s clean and happy, and everybody is, oh yay, happy duty about it. Right. People had no idea how to take that. Yeah. And I know it's become fuel against Crumb for years.
Yeah, it's weird. They, so the subject of incest is obviously, follows through in the strip that I did. His, of course, was a multi-page strip that was like, a grotesque lampoon of 1950s family. And even in the movie, the Crumb documentary, he's got his fans and his detractors are both given equal time. And one woman who was, I guess, a contemporary of Crumb's, she was saying, on the one, her analysis of that particular strip was like, on the one level, you can see it as an indictment of 1950s banality, kind of the thing that we're all used to these days, but maybe was a little more fresh back then. And then she says, but on the other hand, I get the feeling he's getting off on it. And she didn't quite know, what the right take was on the strip. And that's legitimate, because just because the guy is a great artist doesn't mean that he's not capable of masquerading some of his less talented work in the guise of a higher concept. But that's for everyone else to decide. I basically just take his body of his work for itself. And, the strip itself is like, my takeaway was, I've seen any number of evil 1950s family type parody. Clarissa is that to an extent, even though it doesn't resemble my family life at all. My family was not a Leave It to Beaver type family. Robert Crumb came from those kind of circumstances. But whether or not it was him just trying to do shock for shock's sake, maybe he thought it was a turn on, or maybe it was somewhere in between. I don't know. But when I saw it, I was like, wow, that's a pretty gutsy strip. And I want to be in that league of doing stuff that really, I didn't want to do something that was mindlessly shocking, but I did want to shock. And the Clarissa strip turned out to be just strike the perfect note. People got it. They were amazed by it. It inspired better work from me for doing it. And so I credit Robert Crumb with helping inspire that, draw that out of me.
It's really cool to talk to you and hear your perspective on this, because I really did. I took something very positive away from Clarissa, where it was somebody trying to deal with these issues in a way that could quantify them and make them accessible to people outside of the situation. Is there anything I missed that you'd like to talk about? We've kind of hit on. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean that's most of what I'm up to. Yeah, well, I mean, just to push my website, I update with new strips once or twice a week on whatisdeepfried.com. As far as other projects, I mean, you're pretty much up to date. Aftershock will be finished as a story by the end of this year or early next year. The hero's journey should wrap up over the course of next year, hopefully by the summer. Kobayashi Maru will be coming out more regularly next year as well. And in the meantime, I guess I'm looking for publishers for all sorts of things, and I've got all kinds of ideas that who knows when. I would love to team up with some artists. This is the real trick. Is I'd love to take some of the ideas that I don't have time to draw, maybe attach myself to an artist and pitch some stuff like that to companies too. So who knows? I don't have any of them down on paper yet, but in next year I'm really hoping to up my game. Some of the things that I'm working on now will have wrapped, and so I'll have a little more time to dive into some other stuff as well. But yeah, that's the only thing I got to push. My website, whatisdeepfried.com, and you can find links to all my social media and my YouTube channel and all that stuff right on the homepage.
And what's the best way for people to shove money at you through computer screens? I know you can buy the Weapon Brown stuff off of Amazon now, but you can get it through your site again, right?
You can get it through my site. You can go to weaponbrown.com and buy the book directly through there. There's a web store for all my other products right on the front page of whatisdeepfried.com. You can buy my products through Comixology. You can buy them through Amazon, and that's it. You can buy through. You can buy some of the loose issues of Weapon Brown through Kablam. Kablam is a print-on-demand service. They also have a web store. So you can buy, if you like gathering the original series, excuse me, of Weapon Brown, you can buy that through them as well.
Well, awesome. For all viewers, those will be links down in the description for you guys to shove money at Jason.
Yeah, shove it. Or just send me money, just send it to my P.O. box, send it to my whatchamacallit, my PayPal. I've got it's not a Patreon, but I do have a subscription service for recurring payments. You can buy different access to my site. You can see all the dirty drawings I'm doing that I don't show to everyone else on the website for only $5 a month. I forgot that you're supposed to push your Patreon and/or Patreon-related material these days.
I was going to say it's an interview.
Don't buy anything. Send me money.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if it worked that way?
It would be.
Just shove money at me.
Just shove money, bitcoins. I'll take those. I don't know how you spend them, but I'll take a Bitcoin or 3. If you play any video games and you've got like lots of extra, those big diamonds or hearts or rings or the stuff you can collect, send me those. I'll take those. Your spare, laser swords from any, if you got like skins, I'll take your skins, whatever. Yeah, send me everything, whatever, because all that shit is going to be valuable someday. It's going to be the real currency of the future, is skins and upgrades and all the stuff that gold farmers. That's one of the jokes in the current Deep Fried storyline is actual gold farming, where people like dig through the mud and the shit on the ground and find pieces of treasure, just random pieces of treasure that are then collected.
All right. Well, thanks so much for taking time. We've been talking for like an hour and a half. I apologize for kind of rambling.
Oh, my pleasure. And your child was as quiet as a mouse.
We got really lucky. She passed right out. But thanks so much for taking the time for talking with me, man. And I'm going to be keeping an eye out whenever that Clarissa stuff happens and whenever Aftershock drops. I'll be plugging all of that stuff. And when you do more stuff with Clarissa, I might actually get a hold of you and talk a little bit more in depth with you about Clarissa, because this is more about Weapon Brown, so I don't want to go off on a whole tangent and keep you for another 45 minutes. But man, Clarissa was really cool for me, and I'm very happy to hear that you're going to be full informed. So
that's great. Well, I'll be happy to discuss it.
Cool, man. Thanks so much for sticking with me. Links to send this guy money will be in the description below.
Yeah. Yeah, send me money. All right. Well, it's my pleasure talking to you, and have a good evening.
You too, man.